Hello world, it's me, Dennis. In 1979, I was in Los Angeles and began my talk show, Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation, on public access TV. Now, one of the most acclaimed sitcoms of that time was Barney Miller. I had Max Gale, who played Detective Woja Howitz, on my show. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of that interview. But Max introduced me to the creator, writer, and producer of Barney Miller, television icon Danny Arnold. Here is that interview.
They had never heard of him. They said, "Who is he?" We don't know. Horrified is really the wrong word. They were sort of.
I just have a picture of.
They were sort of dully uninterested, they said, "Who is he?" And I said, "This fellow that I saw in New York in a show." And they said, "Well, I don't know, we never heard of him. We had other ideas." And they had all sorts of names.
Mm-hmm. But they didn't want Hal Linden for Barney Miller at all?
No. And particularly after I found out that he had, in fact, done a pilot the year before for Phil D'Antoni. It was going to be the television version of The French Connection. He and Tony LoBianco, they did a pilot called Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside, where they played two undercover, like Popeye and, like they did in French Connection. Dramatic thing. And I found out about it, and I got the film, and I took it over to ABC, and I said, "Here's some close-up footage of the man," because I had never seen him except over the footlights,
Sure.
And the more I looked at him, the more I was convinced that this was the man. And the more they looked, the more they were convinced he was not. And we were in total disagreement. In the meantime, I went on with other casting, and the original pilot had some different cast members in it, And finally, it got to be a showdown situation where I said, "This is the man I want for Barney Miller," and they said, "Well, we're not going to tell you, how to cast it, but obviously if you put somebody in it we don't like, you're not going to get on the air." And I said, "Well,
that's a very little concise statement right there."
Pretty
Sure,
much.
do what you want. Sure.
Do what you want, but we don't like what you do, I suppose that's their prerogative. They feel that's their prerogative. And I said, "Okay, fine. I have to do what I think is best." And I made the deal and put Hal in the pilot. And the pilot did not get on the air. It did not get on the fall schedule. And we were out of business. And of course, I badgered the network to try and keep it alive in hopes that sometime in the future they might revive it or give it a chance. And it just so happened that year, the fall of 1974, the ABC schedule just sort of crumbled to pieces, it just fell
This was
apart.
not when ABC was the shining knight.
Oh, no. No.
Let me interrupt just for a second. This is Danny Arnold, who is the executive producer, the writer, the force behind Barney Miller. We'll talk more about that later. Continue now. But ABC was not the...
Oh, no. That was the joke around town then, was why is ABC the third network? Because there aren't four networks. That was the... they were not, no. And the schedule fell apart, and what happens is people, they desperately scramble around to see what they can put on, because shows were falling apart right and left. And that's what gave Barney life. And they ordered 2 shows.
2?
2. That's all.
Real confidence there.
Yes. Well, the way they turned it, they said, "We're ordering 13 with the right to cut back to 2."
Oh, I see.
So we did the 2 shows, and the first show they reacted very strongly to. So it looked like we were going to get an opportunity to do some more. And they finally ordered 13 shows, and we went on the air at very low ratings. But I knew that the success of the show would depend upon allowing the audience to get to know these characters, to get to understand them, because the show was not a gimmick show. I mean, it wasn't about somebody dying and coming back as a ball of butter or a radio or anything like that. And it wasn't a piece that was designed to feature a star personality that everybody knew. These were comparatively new faces to television audience, so they had nobody to really latch on to. It wasn't the Danny Thomas show or the Mary Tyler Moore show. The star of the show was the show. And in order to have any feeling for the show, it really depended upon the audience getting to know and love the characters that were in the show. And that was going to take time, and I knew that, and I hoped that the low ratings in the beginning wouldn't terrify them into canceling as many shows, you know, the same sort of fate that many good shows have received.
And I obviously didn't.
Well, no, it didn't, because it garnered some support in the network. There were a few network executives, Michael Eisner, Andy Siegel, who is now at CBS, and Mike, who is now president of Paramount. They, and I don't think Marcy was there yet. She might have been. She came in a little bit later, I think, Marcy Carsey. But they felt that there was something in the show to be, you know,
so
to be supported.
Them.
Yes, I think so. I think the show touched
That's what I want to ask you about, Danny. You keep using the word "knew," and I translate that as to you intuited. You knew in your that deep place within you. You knew you were on the right path, even though everybody was telling you.
Oh, I felt absolutely certain.
How do you, when did you begin to rely on that intuition rather than allowing, you know, really begin to rely on the
Well, I've always done. I think I've always done that.
What a gift.
I made. Well, I made a decision a long time ago. I've been in the business a long time, and I've seen the worst mistakes that have been made by people are those who deny their own intuition and allow various and diverse opinions to turn them away from their own commitments. I think that's wrong. And I've always felt that the only thing I had to deal with was my own instinct. I felt that, not that I thought I was right all the time, you know, but when I felt that strongly about something, I knew that I had to stay with that particular point of view. And particularly because in television, points of view are not, you know, are not that prevalent in the business. I mean, we deal with demographics and committee decisions, and you know.
So one man standing like you have stood.
Somebody with a point of view.
Yeah. Whatever
is really what's necessary. If it's your own point of view and you feel that you're right, and not just because you're trying to prove something, but because you've had some experience and you have some reason to be able to judge. And I had in the past. Most of the time, when I went against my own instincts, I proved to be disastrous, you know.
Yeah.
Because my commitment was much stronger than anyone else's to the show, and I knew what could be done. I just absolutely felt every fiber of my body, you know, told me that if I could just keep it alive long enough, that it would be successful, and that people would really grow to love these characters because they were so identifiable. There was so much of everybody in these, you know, in these people, and I wanted the show to be an intelligent show, a sensitive show, and there was a very distinct purpose in doing this show. As a kid, I grew up, I was in trouble a lot. I spent a lot of time around the police, you know. And I remember that there was always a tendency to make a faceless mob, you know, out of kids who all had individual problems and individual personalities, and I think that's true of adults also. I think if you walk into a police station somewhere, they automatically pin a number on you until they find out that you're someone who hasn't done anything or needs help or advice or so on. And that there are, in the various police departments that I found, even in New York, I remember, which was a very tough department, there were men who would reach out and they would say, I want to deal with this person as an individual, I think it's important just generally for society to deal with, to not lose identity, to not lose individual identities. Because there's so many of us running around today, you know. There's so many of us lumped together that we tend to lose that identity, and I think that's criminal. I think it's a shame. So I really wanted to have in Barney Miller a guy who said, I want to take the time to find the individual. I want to deal with him as an individual, you know.
But that's everything that I have read all the way back from Eastern philosophy, the Bible, whatever, any of the rest of the philosophies, all the way up to the modern philosophers, have all said basically the same thing. The same things that you're saying, you're just using your metaphor through your television program to do the same thing, to get to show people that there is this noble place within us, and that the human being is essentially a noble being. It is not essentially...
Yeah, I think that's an instinctive thing. I'm not a great student of philosophy. I read a little bit, but you know, not really that much. But I just felt.
But you don't gotta be. That's the beautiful part.
No.
You don't gotta be a student of philosophy in order to do it.
Well, my own ego, I suppose, from the time I was a kid, said I'm an individual and screamed, you know, that I'm not like everybody else. You got to deal with me as an individual, and
Wow.
I think that's important.
It is.
It's been important to me, and I think it's generally important to everybody, and that's what the show set out to do.
You recognize the people. All right, but before I'll get back to that, but I have something specifically that I want to talk about. You put in 18-hour days in doing Barney Miller. You have done these incredible human feats in the sense that you have led the show. As the executive producer, you have worked in so much of the writing of the show, the nuts and bolts, and the quad system that you developed that I won't even get into, but it's incredible, the lighting that you have and the lighting directors. Everything that you've done on the show, and I understand the work, 18 hours a day. And then you suffered a heart attack recently. How incredible. People said that this might happen to you.
Oh, yeah.
People talked about you.
Nobody was surprised.
Nobody was surprised. Were you surprised? What were you doing? What was happening to you at that time? And how has it...
I don't think I was that surprised. I mean, I knew that
Was this your first?
Yes, yeah. I'm very fortunate because had it not happened, it would not have given me the opportunity to have the eventual surgery that may prolong my life for a while.
You had a bypass?
I had quadruple bypass.
Quadruple bypass?
Mm-hmm.
Do everything in quads, don't you?
Oh, yes, yeah. Talk about the second quad split in my life, yeah. That's funny, I never thought of that.
4 may be a number you need.
No, I wasn't surprised. I think probably the biggest contributor to this sort of thing is pressure, you know, pressure and tension. That has to be bottled up. I've never had the reputation of keeping anything inside.
Volatile, very,
I suppose I've had that reputation. I was in a situation where I had to control myself, you know. There was a lawsuit in progress, and I think the pressure of trying to keep myself in check, you know, was the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were. But I've lived with pressure for a long time. I had no idea what was going on in my body, as most people, you know, have no idea. And when I had the heart attack, they looked inside and they said, "Oh my God, what hath we wrought here?" You know. And they said, "Oh, you got to go. You know, we have to do something about this.
Machinery is down."
Oh yeah, we got to fix this, so you're not going to be around much longer. And I had a brilliant surgeon and a great cardiologist, Gary Sugarman and Jack Matloff, and they fixed me up. So, I wasn't surprised.
Did you think
I've lost, I've had other friends
that died.
Oh yes, that television literally has killed. Leonard Freeman, who was one of my closest friends, who was the creator of Hawaii Five-0. Oddly enough, we wound up opposite each other on the air.
Oh, how ironic.
Yeah.
Great ironies in television.
Oh, yes. Leonard was a brilliant writer and a brilliant producer and a great friend. And business killed him. Mm-hmm. It's happened to others because those people who really care, they give 110%, and that's going to catch up with you sooner or later.
Have you felt your own, and I'm going to talk about that in a second too, oh, how rich this time is with things to talk about. It's delightful. Have you thought about your own death since then, or has it made you reevaluate you, Danny Arnold, who does all these things and does the things that you do?
It does strange things to you.
What has it done to you? I've talked a little bit to a couple of people about you that know you, and they say that they see a change in you.
Yeah. A strange thing happens. You suddenly become very conscious, of life and the things around you that you've sort of taken for granted and haven't paid any attention to. My children grew up suddenly. My kids used to have their birthdays in studio commissaries. I remember my children, if I wanted to see them, my wife had to bring them to the studio. I always left in the morning before they got up, and I never got home till long after they were in bed. And suddenly, from two little pink, chubby 4- and 5-year-olds, I looked around, and my one son was 200 pounds and almost 6 feet tall, and my other one just right behind him. And I realized that we didn't even know each other very well.
Who they were, these are entire human beings that have their own distinct individuality and personalities.
Sure. Grew up behind my back, as it were.
Shameful.
Yes. My wife, who has been a long-suffering, fortunately very phlegmatic, woman, she's put up with a lot of my, nonsense. But suddenly I realized that so much time had passed, and I had lost so much time with them that I was afraid I wouldn't have any time left to make up for it. And suddenly life became very precious to me in other areas. Work was my life, has always been my life. And I still think it's probably the biggest part of my life. But suddenly you look around and you say, where did it all go? What happened to the last 15, 20 years? Where is it? And I can't get those back.
No.
And how much time have I got? And you start adding up the years, and you say, wait a minute, there's a lot of things I want to do yet. I don't want to go yet,
And I don't see you sitting feeling sorry for yourself.
Well, you try not to. Everybody has a tendency to do that. You suddenly become aware of things in your body, that you never were aware of before, and you find yourself sitting for 20 minutes listening to your heartbeat, saying, keep it up, that's it, don't stop now, And I found out that everybody goes through this who's been through the surgery. There are periods of depression, and what was marvelous about it was that a lot of the people who've been through this would telephone, would call, would come and visit me, and would say, now here's what's going to happen, and it became like a club. And a month after I had my surgery, I found out that an old friend of mine, who was a writer, was in the hospital getting ready for the same thing. And I couldn't wait to pick up the phone, and call and say, now listen, now this is what's going to happen, and don't worry about it. And I went to the hospital to see him, and he was amazed, He said, well, I haven't seen you in all these years. I said, I know, it's just one of those things. It's like a second chance that you're given, and I want you to know that. I want you to understand that, as people said to me. So you start becoming more selective, very probably more selfish, and you say, wait a minute, I just don't want to be indiscriminate about how I throw my energies around. I don't want to just work 20 hours a day for the sake of working 20 hours a day. People thought that I did that. And maybe I did. Maybe I was guilty of that. Maybe I was so compulsive that the compulsion itself was what I was
part of the
feeding. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to work. I want to continue working. I have to work differently in television. I think television has to work differently.
Mm-hmm. How can it work differently?
Well, I've talked a great deal about this with people, friends.
Can you tell me some intelligent places where the...
well, I think...
Since we have a short time.
Yes, I think, number one, the tendency for talented people to become embroiled in television, those people who have a standard of excellence, and to find out that it's impractical to try and utilize that standard without either threatening your health and your life or compromising and giving up those standards. Therefore, the economic considerations of television are somehow going to have to adapt if they want to keep those people involved in television. They're going to have to say, we want quality, which is something I don't believe. We talked about this before.
Yeah.
You know, I don't believe that people demand quality. They like it and they see it.
Yes.
But they don't insist on it.
But quality has always been an internal thing.
Absolutely. And for those people who demand of themselves that kind of quality,
Yes.
if they are going to remain in television, then television is going to have to make it possible for them to do it without endangering their lives and their relationships with their families and so on, and it can be done. It can be done. For example, I know that Fred Silverman, who desperately at NBC wanted Larry Gelbart to come back in television, and I know that Larry, when he left MASH, said he would never go back. We used to talk to each other at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd be sitting at my desk, and he'd be at his desk at Fox writing MASH, and I'd be sitting there writing Barney, and we'd talk at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And he told me in the 4th year, he said, I can't anymore. He said, I'm going to lose my mind. That was the day, I don't know if you have time, but
Come on, let's just talk.
He said to me, I have my cast coming in to sit around the table and read a script, and he said, I've been sitting staring at blank pages for 5 days. He said, I don't have a script, I don't have one word on paper. I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to go downstairs and tell the actors they're going to ad-lib a show. And I said, come on, Larry. He said, well, you know, actors, they're always saying they can do it, you know. And they used to hear that too, you know. And I said, well, that'll be interesting. Let me know what happened. And he had a marvelous situation about a newspaper man who comes to Korea to interview. You remember the show with Cleet Roberts?
Yes.
Larry went downstairs, told them the idea, and of course he has a brilliant cast in MASH.
He does.
And he turned them loose, and he said, I don't know, he said he must have shot 38,000 feet of film just, you know, doing this sort of thing. But it came together, you know. And that's fine. You can't do that every week.
Sure.
But Larry left because of those pressures. To get Larry Gelbart back in television, Fred Silverman was smart enough to say to Larry, here is a commitment. You're on the air for 22 shows next year. I'm going to give you 1.5 years to prepare. Wow. That's how you get Larry Gelbart back in. That's how you get me back in television. That's how you get anybody who has discovered that, number one, they don't have anything more to prove. We don't, fortunately, don't need the money.
Right.
We see we have made a commitment to our business and paid our dues to where people happily have said, we accept what you've done and we honor what you've done.
Yes.
Now, write a book, write a play. See, Larry has happily had those experiences.
Sure.
I have not. I have not even attempted it. I may not be very successful, but I do want to try. But to get people like that to come back, you have to say, we'll make it possible for you to stay alive. That means changing the economics, changing the way of thinking, and gambling, and having the faith and the commitment in the people who have, in turn, the faith and commitments in the work they do.
That would put television, which I see as already the most enormous influence, that has ever been devised by human being for instantaneous communication on so many levels, into such a beautiful place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Then it becomes, I think, even a greater art form.
Yes.
Because what would you have done with Shakespeare? He couldn't have gotten through one season. You know, he'd have had to cancel out. Can you imagine if they had to come to him and say, write another 22 plays?
Yeah. Couldn't be done.
Can't do it. You cannot do it. While people are geared to understanding that that's what's necessary, there are some people who will do it and simply die.
So television is actually a baby who has just kind of grown up very spoiled, and now
it has
discipline.
Of course, it has a voracious appetite.
Just
It just eats everything and, you know, just devours talent and spits it out. And
that time continuously, that, you know, that clock comes around and now it's time for another show. And
sure.
it's
And
time
you
for
lose
another,
people.
and
The people who can really do things, they suddenly find, they say, wait a minute, you know, hold on. I have a kind of a proprietary interest in certain writers that I started. Bernard Slade, you know, who did Same Time Next Year in Tribute and is a brilliant young writer. I brought him to this country from Canada on Bewitched, when I was producing Bewitched. And Bernie killed himself on television for years and then finally got disgusted one day and said, who needs this?
Yeah.
And he went away and wrote Same Time Next Year. Well, you're not going to get Bernie Slade back in television. Unless you say to him, here is a forum and the most powerful medium in the world. Ever. It wants what you have to say. We'll make it possible for you to do it economically, physically, emotionally. Miniseries are good, specials are good, but they always say series are the backbones. You got to have that every week. Well, if you got to have it every week, give people time enough ahead of time to do it, you know.
They will. I mean, it almost has to come to that, Danny. I mean, as long as, because to me, it appears to be common sense. Because the people, you can't go on not feeling good about yourself, not feeling that wonderful feeling you get when you have felt a Barney Miller episode over the years, the people that come up to you and the feeling that you get deep within you, which is where the real reward comes, that you have done this, you have helped allow happen something wonderful.
Oh, I'm very proud of the show and all the people involved in it.
Exactly, and of all of them, that type of feeling can't be bought.
No.
No amount of money, no amount of fame, no amount of on the human level, it just can't come. So this seems to be the next step. Where are we going to pioneer, Danny? You're a pioneer, you're on an adventure.
Well, I hope there's some new young there's some new young people who come along. There are talented kids who come along, but the business makes it too easy for them now to get more and work less, unfortunately. What you need are, if you don't have people who have the sort of compulsions that I have, you know, or like Tony Sheehan, who is producing the show and writing so much of the material now, almost most of it, on Barney. Here's a young fella who 3 years ago was in UCLA and is an enormously talented writer, but a kid who doesn't care about doing anything else but write. I mean, he writes. He loves to write. He loves to write. He sits and he's that compulsive about his work as I was, and as I still think I am. Of course, I don't think you ever lose that. But in most cases, young, talented writers come along, and I told you I've lectured at universities and I've talked to many of the students, and they all want to know, how do you get into television? A lot of them want to know how you make a fortune in television, you know. And a young, talented writer comes along and is gobbled up in 5 seconds. It's recognizable, you know. A script that he does, something that he's written as an example of his work falls into somebody's hands and they say, grab this person.
This is,
And then an agent will grab that person and say, hold it, you don't have to kill yourself. We'll make deals, you'll do 3 pilots, and then you can go to Mexico, they'll send you the royalties. You know, there's not enough execution. There's a lot of ideas.
But execution is the key.
On a week-to-week basis, execution is the key. Absolutely.